Hi, everybody. So yeah, that title is kind of a mouthful. So anyway, I'm going to talk today a little bit about kind of something where I'm assuming we're all engaged in. We're all somewhere in kind of the DevOps journey, trying to move to DevOps, get better at it, so on. And I want to, because Amazon and AWS is kind of in a unique place in the industry right now, I want to talk a little bit about how we experience that, which has kind of happened quite some time ago, and is still ongoing. I'll talk about that a little bit, and then talk about how the part of Amazon that is my organization, AWS, and how we help customers today, and how what we think the future looks like as well. So we'll go through a little bit of that. So just a quick introduction for me. I am the SI practice lead for DevOps. And the way that works I'm part of the partner organization at AWS, and the way that works is we have part of the organization that works directly with partners, and then we have another part of the organization that kind of thinks of in terms of customer problems and how can we solve them. So I'm in the segment related to DevOps, and my role is to identify what's needed out there in the DevOps world and how can we at AWS with our technology and, importantly, with our partners, go solve those problems. So it's an interesting and fun thing to do. I joined AWS just last year, so I'm relatively new to the organization, but have a long and varied career. It's almost exhausting to talk about, so I won't put you all through it. But I've been in big systems integrators. I've worked with all sorts of organizations, helping them to modernize, get better at development. I've also been in a slew of different startups and have had success and failure in those, and you really learn from both. I'm also kind of highly agile. I was part of the small talk community, which was, you can think of agile before the term came about, and I was got to work with people like Kent Beck and various interesting folks in the Agile community, and moved over to DevOps when I spent some time at ThoughtWorks and worked with Jez Humble when he was doing continuous delivery. So I've been a real advocate of DevOps for quite some time. I've worked with a lot of companies in that area. So I've got some background to go along with my experience in this new kind of AWS and Amazon is officially peculiar. That's the word that we use for ourselves. We're different than other companies by design. And so it's been real interesting for me to have all this experience with other companies and then come into this one, and I'll try to share a little bit of that. One more side story I'll mention is that in part of all my travels and doing DevOps, I actually spent some time living in Vienna, Austria. And I was doing a big DevOps transformation there for a company. And because I had done a lot of tech mentoring back in the United States, I also did it when I was living in Austria, and I would kind of help startups there and advise them, things along those lines. And the interesting thing there is one of the little companies that I ran into in Vienna was a company called CodeShip. And that was the early days of CodeShip. And the funny part is, and I claim no credit for anything, but a part of the conversation went, wow, maybe you guys should get out of Vienna and get to somewhere that's more of a tech hotspot like Berlin or London, which they went to Berlin. And then eventually you probably want to end up in the US. And so maybe that was all it was maybe kind of obvious stuff. It was kind of interesting. It was also the reason why I ended up coming to Seattle. Vienna is a fantastic place to live, but I wanted to be kind of closer to the center of the tech universe, and that's certainly what Seattle is these days. So as I mentioned, what I'll talk about first a little bit about kind of the Amazon transformation story, because it is an interesting one. It's almost unfair when you talk about DevOps at Amazon and at AWS, because DevOps really comes easy to our organization. And the reason, and it comes hard to most organizations, and it hasn't always been easy at Amazon, but the issue is that we are culturally and organizationally set up for DevOps. And those are the things that most companies struggle with. And so I want to kind of talk about how that came about. And one of my comments coming into this company is that I've never seen a company spend more time and effort on its culture than Amazon does. If you ever hear about all the leadership principle stuff, it is real. It's not just to get a job there, it's how the whole company does things, and it is reinforced all the time. And it definitely makes DevOps easy, and I'll talk about why that is. Then the other side of this is, how are we helping everybody else, start to do this? And we'll talk about that. And then also kind of where we think things are going. So just a little bit about the Amazon culture and, the sort of Uber principle and the leadership principles is customer obsession. And, when I first came into the organization, it was kind of, wow, obsession. That's almost a negative sounding word. Why are we saying obsession? Why don't we just say we're customer focused? And the answer is that everybody says they're customer focused. And I think they were looking for a stronger word. And it's truly a matter of, at Amazon and at AWS, every part of the organization at every level needs to be thinking in terms of customers and how it's going to help them. If you look at the whole history of development, it's been a matter of more and more technology to automate more and more things to help us get closer to what we actually need to be doing for whoever needs our software. And this is one of the things that Amazon really focuses on, but there's big technical hurdles. It's hard to build a computer system. You need all sorts of infrastructure. If you're going to scale it for massive scale, you need all kinds of other things as well. So a big kind of issue. The other things here are also interesting. I would say that it's easy to say, oh, we're customer focused, and what that means is we just listen to customers and we just do what they tell us. And I think you all probably recognize that that's the wrong thing to do too. Customers are looking to you for expertise and leadership, not just to do what they're asking. They want you to tell them or invent the next right things to do. And so the other parts of the culture at Amazon I find really interesting is this sort of experimentation idea, being willing to fail, being willing to be misunderstood. I think that's really important as well. We keep trying things in order to get to what our customers really need, rather than maybe just what they're asking for today. We're listening to what they're asking for today, but we're trying to leap ahead and get to what will really help them the most. So a little bit of discussion about how development evolved inside the company. Back in 2001, the Amazon.com website was a huge monolith application, mostly written in Perl. And it had all the stuff that most of us may be familiar with. All kinds of dependencies, very difficult to do new releases. It had all the kind of typical problems. And then kind of an interesting thing happens, and it's almost legendary at this point. There was kind of what I would call a top-down mandate to be a bottom-up. And what I mean by this is the famous Jeff Bezos memo that came out that basically said everybody's going to start doing interfaces, a service-oriented architecture. Well, that was the kind of, in 2001, that's what you would call what today we think of as microservices. There were bigger services at first, but basically what was decided is that every piece of software written within Amazon was going to be in terms of well-defined interfaces such that things could be independently changed. The reason I mention this is that it's the secret to the scale that Amazon and AWS has today. The fact that these, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, these microservice architectures, there's lots of negatives to them. They're not all great. There's lots of things about them that are hard, but they scale to a degree we've never seen before. And that's what becomes important. In fact, the whole transformation started mostly in 2002, 2003. By 2009, there was this feeling it was mostly done. So that's another thing to look at. I run into organizations that think they're going to do a DevOps transformation in a year. That's not realistic. It takes a lot of time, especially if you're really changing your thinking. It's not just a matter of automating some things. I mean, how having Jenkins is great, automating, and folks from CloudBees here will back me up. It's not just a matter of having CI server and some automation in place. It's a matter of changing how you're doing things, constantly doing smaller units of work faster and faster. And that takes a whole, the thing I'll oftentimes say about CI is what's most important about continuous integration is that you're training developers not to break other people's stuff. You're creating, you're using some technology to point out when developers are breaking stuff, and I don't know if you've seen it, but I've seen organizations that have a big red light or a green light when the build is broken, or they put a big a rubber chicken on your desk if you're the one that broke the build. Okay. These are nice social ways to start to teach people, maybe I should figure out how to write stuff in such a way that I don't break other people's code. And that's part of what microservices is. Now, another interesting thing I'd say about these microservice architectures, if you go out and look at them out there, I came from the era of these really good maps of your system and real organized and everything. If you look at all the systems out there today, they all look like the Death Star. There are a gazillion services all talking to different things. And so it's kind of hard, whether it's a trace route or a dependency map or whatever, it's kind of hard to grok what's going on. This is where I talk about some of the negatives that come with microservices is you've got to find a way to navigate through this and understand what the heck's going on. But yeah, you'll see every company you'll talk to, they'll come up and say, well, here's us, and yep, it's another Death Star. It used to be everybody was a toaster, right? Everybody had slots, in their architecture or whatever. Now we're all Death Stars for some reason. So here's the AWS Death Star, or the Amazon Death Star. It's what we look at, real interesting. But the important parts of this are that every one of these services is relatively single purpose. It only connects through API. That's mandated, I think there was a joke, I don't know if it's really true, but supposedly the last line of the memo at Amazon was, and by the way, if you don't do this, you're fired. Have a nice day. So that's top-down orders to be bottom-up, I think. So everything connects over web technology, over HTTPS. Everything's a black box. It's microservices. And in a lot of ways, before people were really talking a lot about microservices, that's what Amazon was doing. So what's behind these microservices? How do you set yourselves up to build them? Well, the other kind of famous thing you'll hear about is our, the two pizza teams. And when I first heard this, I was like, a two pizza team? You mean I'm the whole team? But no, that's not right. In general, two big pizzas, you should be able to feed almost up to 10 people, although I don't believe 10 people, that's too many, for two pizzas. But a small teams is kind of the point. And inside the organization, we call them service teams, and they build these primitives. These primitives are essentially the kind of the microservices. And what's interesting about these teams is they're charged with the whole ball of wax. They plan their products, they do the development work, they do the testing, and they operate it when it's complete. And that's a real shift in thinking from all of us that grew up in more siloed organization where it's somebody else's job to do a lot of these other things. All those things are pushed down to a really low level in the organization, and it's been that way for a long time. You build it, you run it. It's one of the things that's interesting, I think, that's a difference between the way Amazon and AWS does things and what you hear a lot about the Google model, and the Google stuff's all awesome, but they have this kind of next wave operations group that's led by the SREs. And I love some things about the SRE concept, but it has the potential to be its own silo. And for our part at Amazon, we have the development teams continue to do the operations. And so they have to do the SRE-like things in our individual development teams. And so all these teams are part of somewhere in the overall organization, part of bigger pieces, but everything's broken down to that kind of level. It may say, we have this this tool inside the organization called Phone Tool. And you end up spending, because it's sort of an org chart and contact manager, and you end up spending an inordinate amount of your time because the whole place is made up of these tiny little teams, and you've got to navigate through the org and find who's doing what and how things are working. It's really, really interesting. Just a little bit about kind of, once again, this kind of customer focus. We call it working backwards. And the big thing I would say about it is it's pushing these questions down to places where it hadn't been in the past in most organizations. The developers need to be thinking about the customers really, really strongly, much more like what I've seen and tends to happen in startups. And so these are the questions that you're asking. And the other thing that's really interesting is how do you know what your customers need or want? Is this just opinion, or is there something to back it up? Do you have real data behind what you're talking about? So it's kind of interesting. If you kind of look at a Venn diagram of what these teams are responsible for, they have to do their product, but there's a whole bunch of tools, and that's where Jenkins, where lots of other tools come into play. There's all sorts of things. I came from an era, once again, exhausting to talk about, but I came from an era where development teams would build their own tools to the extent they would even build operating systems. To do the things that they wanted to do. And over time, more and more tools have become available, and we've been able to work higher and higher kind of up. And so on the right there, you see a whole list of things the team might use and is not responsible for. Oftentimes, these things being delivered by other teams within the company, or in other cases from products or from open source. We're obviously heavy users of open source. They can focus more or less on their product. So what's the end result of all this? Thousands of teams within Amazon and AWS, a microservice architecture, doing continuous delivery, been doing it for some time, lots of different environments. This is 2016. God knows what it is now. I need to go find out, but 60 million deployments per year. So just a massive amount of small incremental change. So that's the short story of kind of what happened with Amazon. Let's shift gears now more to AWS. And what's AWS about? Well, I talk about it as being kind of a DevOps pipeline to the cloud. I see organizations that think it's kind of an either or think that one isn't necessarily connected with the other. It's like, well, we got to get to the cloud, we don't have time for DevOps, or even more likely, we're doing DevOps and we're dabbling in the cloud. My experience has been that the two go hand in hand in most cases. One reason that I would say that is that the elasticity that a cloud provides becomes really, really important when you're doing lots and lots of small incremental deployments or small incremental releases in parallel. What you need is environments to test those things. What I would run into all the time is this disaster of a test lab within an organization where they're trying to test 25 different things at once, and it doesn't really match production, and keeping the thing up and going and valid is a ton of work. Having the ability to spin up cloud infrastructure and spin up versions, particular versions of your software so that you can test small changes and then throwing it away when you're done makes all the difference in DevOps. So I think that in most cases it really makes sense to do DevOps and the cloud at the same time. Some of the advantages of AWS for DevOps, I won't go into too much of this, we talk about it a lot, but certainly we provide all sorts of facilities, all sorts of ways to automate what's there. We're obsessive about security, and there's great ways to understand how to really do things in the most secure fashion possible. It was one of the things that I would run into with cloud stuff all the time. The original thing was, hey, the cloud stuff, is it secure? And when you kind of look at what we or the other clouds, but especially the one I know for sure about is us, what we do is extraordinary as far as the amount of effort that we put into making our system secure. It needs your help. You're a part of making it secure, but all the facilities you need are there. And then another thing that I'll talk about quite a bit is sort of the large partner community. AWS has 50,000 registered partners. We have hundreds of higher tier partners that we work with on a very, very active basis to do all sorts of things. So the other comment that I would make about the organization that I think is kind of interesting, it's not really a conventional tech, talk about the peculiar thing and everything. It's not really a conventional tech company. It's a customer that became a tech provider. And a lot of what AWS thinks about is from a customer perspective, as we've said, but customer choice is super important. And so we don't try to say, well, we know how things need to work, everybody needs to do it our way. We tend to offer the different things that customers want to try for the different things that they do and let them sort out what makes the most sense. And I'll show you some examples of that. So going back to that kind of Venn diagram, this is all the stuff or the service teams have to be able to do. They have to do application development and infrastructure management and alarms and testing and compliance. So these are all parts of the process that they have to do, but only for their product, only for what their stuff is. So there's a lot of technology that they need to bring into play. So when you kind of look at the AWS DevOps portfolio, there's kind of two categories. There's the things that we do as a service, and here's a bunch of the things that you may be kind of familiar with. There's a whole set of development tools from CodeStar and Code Commit, Code Build, and so on. There's OpsWorks that helps you use a lot of what had been the leading kind of DevOps infrastructure as code tools out there. And then there's also CloudFormation. It's kind of interesting. I came into AWS, and I was more of a Terraform person, as most developers, I think in a lot of cases are. I've learned some appreciation for CloudFormation. One of the most interesting things about CloudFormation is how we use it to develop our own new services. It's as important as a tool for us as it is for anybody, although you'll see that a lot of our kind of advanced partners use it in really advanced ways as well. And then on the monitoring and logging side, there's X-Ray and CloudWatch and CloudTrail and a whole set of things there as well. So we offer tools to do most of the gamut of development, but here's the thing that I think is interesting, is like unlike many other tech companies, our focus isn't on completely having you use all of our tools. We want you to use the tools that you like the best and that make the most sense for you. And so I've seen it, we're as focused on our partners' technology as we are on our own services. Most of these services don't cost anything. It's more a matter of they're there to help customers so that they can work on AWS. But a lot of, if you don't use these, it's no problem. We have all sorts of other DevOps partners out there that we work with really closely. CloudBees being one of them. We do things with CloudBees all the time. There's all sorts of integrations with Jenkins, integrations with CloudBees technology, with more to come. These are all kind of more advanced partners of ours. But you see what we've got in kind of the development area, in the infrastructure as code area, everybody from Hashi to Ansible, Chef Puppet, the whole group there. And then this monitoring and logging area, people like New Relic and Dynatrace and Datadog and so on. By the way, with all these Death Stars out there, one of the really critical things is monitoring. It becomes more important over time, and those sorts of tools are going to become not a nice to have, but a must have in a lot of cases. And what you find is that CloudBees and Jenkins works in all sorts of different places. I mean, it's very typical to see an AWS integration where you're using Jenkins to manage whether it's Docker images going into EC2 or even to work with CloudFormation templates, all sorts of things that are there. So Jenkins forms a glue for all kinds of stuff and all sorts of automation. We work very smoothly with Jenkins. The other part that's kind of particular to what I do every day is I work with a lot of our systems integrators and our consulting partners. And here's just an example of some of them. And what I would say about these companies is that whenever you see on the AWS website that a partner has a competency for DevOps, that absolutely doesn't mean they filled out a form and said that they knew it. We don't allow DevOps competency partners into the program until they've proved they've done it with other customers with AWS. So you can be sure that each of these partners really has the experience of doing DevOps transformation with the AWS platform of tools. And so, yeah, it's a great list. We need more of them. We have too many, I say too many, we don't have too many customers, but we have more customers than we have partners that we can connect them to and to help them with. And so that's really key. So let me kind of finish up with, where do we see things going? What's happening now, and how may that relate to CloudBees? One thing I'll talk about is, we're still seeing serverless as just something that's building and building and building momentum, and I'm seeing it happen in multiple different ways. And I guess my way of looking at serverless is, it's not always that these new ideas are so good, it's that sometimes we evolve into doing things so bad. In that we got to the place with software development that almost every organization on the planet needed to have, at one point, needed to have the skills to run their own data center. That never made any sense. Cloud is coming along now. Let somebody else do that, do the data center stuff, and you just work on your software. And we see serverless the exact same way. There are going to be developers that are going to want to manage computers and infrastructure and everything that's behind what they're doing for what they're building. But I think eventually, most developers don't need to know about all that infrastructure stuff. They just needed to have it provided to them and automatically scaled in a way. And that's what we're seeing with serverless. And we're seeing it with a lot of highly expert companies now that are using it to do really interesting things. They're using it to work with other parts of AWS. Serverless is the other technology, Lambda, I'll mention the serverless part of AWS. Besides CloudFormation, Lambda is the other thing that we're using to improve our own products and services more than anything else. And that's the thing that I'm seeing out there with customers now is that, they need a new function, they need a new feature in their software, and it's easier to do it by just getting a Lambda function, API gateway, and connecting up to what they already have. And so they can just graft on a new feature using serverless, then they graft on another one, and then they graft on another one, and pretty soon it's a pretty amazing how much of what they have is really being worked in a serverless way. And so here's the the interesting quote from Dr. Vogel's. It's sort of a no server is easier to manage than no server. And that's kind of the key is that I think for a lot of software, not to say that there aren't going to be a lot of people that are going to want to do their own stuff still, at a deeper level, but for a ton of what I see out there with all my time working with consulting companies and all the organizations that I've seen, what I mostly see is lots of companies that are overwhelmed. They have more need for technology than they can possibly find the skills to go build. And man, I've seen a lot of bad software, really bad, all over the place. And so taking more things off of developers' plates and organizations' plates is really a win. So, we're seeing a very consistent, growth in the whole functions as a service type market, and what's happening. Our experience with Lambda is probably even more dramatic than this slide. And another thing that I'll mention with it is that if you look at what kind of we've been recommending from a standpoint of computer science, one of the things that I love about serverless is that all the things that we've been telling people that they ought to do, but they oftentimes can't or won't or haven't been able to, you kind of have to do with serverless. It's kind of like you have to do the good things. You have to make small stateless functions that can scale. and you do it just a piece at a time. And that's really, I think we're going to get to things that are much more maintainable and much easier to grow. We've got a complete serverless platform, all sorts of stuff there. That's things that you can look and see online with us. We're adding more and more of our own services are starting to work in a serverless way. You're getting the ability to do things like Lambda at the edge, where you can get your functionality to get higher performance or be closer to where you are. We're doing it for IoT, so continuing to be built out. That's the thing where, having done it for longer, we've had a pretty good advantage of being able to continue to mature what's here. And then the other thing I'd say is that there's a partner community out there. There's a whole new group of companies that are coming up that are focusing with new tools and technologies that are kind of serverless oriented and serverless based. And CloudBees is one of them. You go take a look at Jenkins for serverless in Google. There's lots of people doing the ability of grafting Jenkins types of capabilities for doing serverless development. I think there's going to be kind of more to come. So all kinds of stuff kind of in the serverless area, but hey, this is what all the developers are talking about. It seems like if you go to any conference, it's all about containers, Kubernetes, things along those lines. So as I told you before, we love serverless. We think that some aspects of serverless are the future, but we believe in customer choice, and we think that there's definitely use cases where that people it makes sense to do things, differently, than what we're saying there. And so we think that lots of customers are going to go out and use containers. And so you look at any kind of container platform, you still need infrastructure for it to run on, and obviously we have that with AWS, with EC2, and so on. But you need a kind of a control plane. And we've had for a while ECS, which is kind of a container orchestration system. There's more to it than that, but that's sort of the basics. But the other thing that we saw out there is the momentum behind Kubernetes. And so this week, we went GA with our Kubernetes service. It turns out Kubernetes is awesome. I actually love the technology, but it's not super easy to set up and get running. I've seen a lot of companies have all kinds of problems with it. So I think that having somebody just supply it to you and take it off the table for you to have to just kind of get the infrastructure for Kubernetes in place such that you can just build the things you want on top of it is something customers have told us that they really wanted. And I fully expect that AWS has already been one of the leading places that Kubernetes systems have been hosted. I suspect that EKS is going to very, very quickly become the leading Kubernetes kind of control plane that's out there. So a lot of excitement there without a doubt. And then the other side of this is to take serverless to containers. And so instead of just uploading a function, maybe the wrapper for your function is really your Docker container. And that's what Fargate is all about, this ability to upload a container and have somebody else worry about all the infrastructure underneath it and how it has to scale. If 100 users need to access it, we handle it. If 1 million users have to access it, somebody else is responsible for making sure that works. And so that's the other side. And Fargate is already working with ECS, and it's going to expand and do more, and do more things that are out there. So, yeah, we talked a little bit about ECS, EKS, and Fargate. The other thing that's there is the Amazon Elastic Container Registry. So there's a registry that can be a part of everything that's there as well. So full set of services for containers, just as we've got a full set of services for traditional apps, and a full set of services for serverless. So, I think that what you see with AWS is a determination to be able to help just about every kind of customer that's out there. Okay, thanks a lot for your time.